The Galactic Council's central observatory, a sprawling amphitheater holding representatives from 4,000 species, was hushed as the holographic feed flickered to life. Exarch Malik of the Orixian Hegemony adjusted his sensory stalks, watching the primitive planet Earth with clinical satisfaction. To the Hegemony, humans were nothing more than a convenient myth, or Deathworlders, living on a planet so hostile that merely existing there was considered a military exercise. Earth was officially classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, a nightmare where gravity, weather, and biology seemed designed specifically to cause maximum trauma to its inhabitants. The Trespasser has made landfall, Malik announced, his feeding tentacles curling as the mountain-sized biological weapon rose from the Pacific. The precursors, an ancient invading force, had finally sent their biological cleaning crew to sanitize the planet. On the main view screen, San Francisco's iconic bridge was shredded like tissue paper. The Council anticipated total surrender after the first 100 million casualties, assuming that terrified masses would flee when the end arrived. They are primates who invented nuclear weapons before they discovered basic space travel. A sub-commander mocked, mandibles clicking in amusement. They will roll over within the hour. But the humans did not roll over. As the beast leveled the city, the human government didn't send diplomats to plead for mercy or military commanders to beg for aid. Instead, the Council's sensors detected a chilling anomaly. Every human military installation went dark simultaneously. Malik felt his secondary stomach churn with a sudden, primitive unease. "This is Stage 4, Malik whispered, recalling a Forbidden Intelligence report on human behavior. When a human says they are getting annoyed, they stop being patient. They stop being polite. They start solving problems the efficient way instead of the nice way." On the surface, the humans weren't panicking. They were calculating, mapping the mathematics of the monster. Suddenly, the sensor grid screamed. From the depths of human industrial fault zones, a new energy signature emerged. Massive readings that did not match any known technology. Malik leaned forward, his eyes wide in genuine confusion. What are they doing? They don't have the infrastructure for a counterattack. A voice crackled over the emergency channel, speaking Galactic Standard with a calm that promised future violence. "This is the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps. You sent a monster to our home because you assumed we were prey. But on Earth, we have a saying. Never mistake kindness for weakness." The sky didn't fill with evacuation ships. It filled with a shadow so large it rivaled the Kaiju itself. A colossal mechanical hand, made of forged steel and a stubborn refusal to die, slammed into the beast's jaw with the force of a supernova. Malik gripped the edge of his console as his pride crumbled. "They didn't build a weapon," he breathed. "They built a god." But as the first Jaeger engaged the beast, the Council's sensors picked up something even worse. A second, even larger signature rising from the Arctic, and it was moving toward the Council's own observation station. Exarch Malik watched the holographic feed with a twitch in his primary sensory stalk. On the surface of Earth, the entity known as Trespasser had already shrugged off a barrage of conventional nuclear strikes. The very weapons the Hegemony believed were the pinnacle of human destructive capability. In any other sector, a Class 12 Deathworld species would have collapsed into religious mania or total societal breakdown after such a failure. But humans were different. They were born from a planet where the environment itself was a constant predator, forcing them to spend 10,000 years perfecting the art of war against their own kind. "They aren't retreating," a junior analyst chattered, his voice rising in an octave of disbelief. "They are clearing logistics corridors. They are doing accounting." Malik realized with a surge of unease that the humans had moved past fear and into a state of tactical annoyance. According to the Forbidden Annoyance Protocols, when a human stops being polite, they stop seeing the enemy as a threat and start seeing them as a technical problem to be solved. The Hegemony had assumed human engineering was primitive, but humans were actually masters of making things look harmless until the exact moment they needed them to be devastating. From the smoke of the devastated California coastline, the first Jaeger brawler Yukon stood upright. It was a monument to human stubbornness, a towering frame of creative disassembly and surgical precision that defied every known law of Calorian physics. The Hegemony had characterized humans as prey pretending to be predators, but the sheer scale of the machine suggested they had been practicing violence far longer than they had been practicing diplomacy. The cost of such a machine. "It's irrational," Malik muttered, his eyes tracking the Jaeger's fusion-powered movements. The resources required to build a mechanical god on a planet with limited orbital infrastructure are statistically impossible. They didn't use an infrastructure we could detect, Exarch, the analyst replied, his chromatophores turning a pale, terrified white. They've been building in secret, using the very fault zones and deep continental trenches we ignored. They aren't just defending, they are adapting. The Jaeger reached out, its massive steel digits crushing into the Kaiju's carapace with a tactical prescience that suggested the humans had already calculated every possible outcome of the struggle. This wasn't a battle of honor or glory. It was a demonstration of humanity without filters. Malik's console suddenly flickered with a high-priority encrypted burst from Earth's home-world security, a shadow organization the Hegemony hadn't even known existed. The message contained a list of every Hegemony observer ship in orbit, their exact coordinates, and their crew manifests. The voice of the human representative returned, colder than before. "We know you're watching, Exarch. We know you sent the cleaning crew. But on Earth, we don't negotiate with extinction. We survive it." As Brawler Yukon delivered a final, bone-shattering blow to the beast, Malik saw the Jaeger's visor slide open, revealing two pilots connected by a web of neural interfaces. His sensory stalks went rigid as he realized the truth. The humans hadn't just built a giant machine. They had found a way to merge their very consciousness, creating a pack of predators that shared a single mind. The first Kaiju fell, but on the Hegemony's long-range sensors, 100 more signatures began to pulse deep within the Pacific breach. And they were evolving faster than Malik's processors could calculate. Exarch Malik's observation deck hummed with the sound of frantically recalibrating sensors as his lead science officer, Vorn, pulled up the neurological data from the latest Jaeger engagement. The holographic display showed two human brains glowing with an intensity that the Eryxian Hegemony's medical databases flagged as fatal neural overload. To the Hegemony, whose species prided themselves on individual logical isolation, what the humans were doing was a biological nightmare. "They call it the drift," Vorn reported, his chromatophores cycling through a sickly shade of gray. "It is not just a control system. They are creating a shared neural bridge, merging their memories, their traumas, and their very instincts into a single cohesive fighting entity." Malik watched as the data stream synchronized. They are merging consciousness to overcome the limitation of their underdeveloped neck muscles and fragile frames? He asked, trying to find a logical flaw in their design. "No, Exarch," Vorn replied, his voice trembling. "They are doing it because they evolved on a planet where predators hunt in packs. They have taken a biological imperative, the need to protect their young and cooperate for survival, and turned it into a weapon of tactical prescience." On the screen, the Jaeger Gipsy Danger moved with an eerie, fluid grace that defied its 10,000-ton weight. It didn't fight like a machine. It fought like a creature that had been practicing violence for millions of years. Every time the Kaiju attempted a fallback position, the Jaeger was already there, its movements choreographed by two minds that had become one. It was a demonstration that continued resistance was literally impossible. "They are accounting for every variable of the monster's biology," Malik muttered, remembering the report that claimed humans defeated us through accounting. The humans weren't just fighting. They were calculating the mathematics of the monster in real time, removing every option the beast had. Suddenly, the sensor grid on Malik's station flared a violent, bioluminescent blue. A new contact was emerging from the Pacific breach, but its energy signature was off the scale. It wasn't just a larger biological mass, it was emitting a frequency that matched the Hegemony's own communication encryption. "Exarch," Vorn whispered, staring at the new reading. "The breach is not just a portal for biological assets, it is a signal relay. The precursors, they are not just cleaning the planet. They are listening to us." A transmission cut through the silence of the observatory, bypassing every Calorian security protocol. It wasn't from the humans this time. It was a distorted, multitonal screech from the breach that translated into a single chilling phrase in galactic standard. "The myth is real, and it is coming for the Council." Malik felt his primary heart stop. The humans weren't the only ones who had been watching. And as the breach began to widen, a massive metallic claw, not made of earth steel but of something ancient and unanalyzable, gripped the edge of the rift. Director Voran of the Marathian Commerce Guild stood in the high-tier observation seats, his three eyes wide as he processed the latest data streams from the Pacific breach. The Kaiju were no longer random biological anomalies. They were evolving into Category 3 and 4 behemoths, each specifically designed to counter the steel gods humans had built. To any other civilization, this escalation would have signaled the end, but the humans were reacting with a kind of exhausted certainty that made Voron's scales ripple with unease. The humans had fully transitioned into Stage 4 of their psychological progression. They were no longer panicked or even particularly stressed. They were, in their own words, actually getting annoyed. On the open tactical channels, the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps wasn't broadcasting pleas for reinforcements. Instead, they were transmitting on educational frequencies, using the planetary threat-level monsters as instructional models for their junior Jaeger pilots. Trainee squadrons? Notice the leg-to-torso ratio on this Category 4. A human instructor's voice crackled through the Council's translators, sounding almost bored. Excellent for practicing predictive firing solutions and energy management. Alpha 7, watch your speed in those turns, your bleeding efficiency. The Council delegates sat in stunned silence as the Jaeger striker Eureka executed a textbook splits maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for a machine of its mass. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were calculating every single option and removing them systematically with tactical prescience. The humans were grading the Kaiju's tactics, marking their formation discipline as predictable and their evasive maneuvering as poor. They have turned a war of extermination into a training exercise, Voron muttered, his heart sacs clenching. He realized that the humans didn't fear the monsters anymore. They were accounting for them, treating the apocalypse like a resource management problem. However, the precursors were not the only ones learning. A new alert flooded the Council's neural interfaces, one that didn't come from Earth's surface. Massive energy signatures, biological and unanalyzable, were emerging from the slip space near the Council's own core worlds. Voron looked at the main view screen, and his chromatophores went a flat, terrified white. The precursors hadn't just sent more Kaiju to Earth, they had used the humans' instructional sessions to refine their bioweapons for a different target. Two massive, multi-limbed entities were now uncloaking in the cold black of the Council's own backyard, and their energy readings matched the monstrous signatures the humans had locked beneath their own world. A final human message appeared on Voron's console, addressed to every Council delegate. "We've been watching you watch us. You let the cleaning crew in. Now you're about to find out what happens when the primitive species you exploited stops playing by the rules." Beyond the station's reinforced glass, the first Council defense platform vanished. Not destroyed by plasma, but unmade, as if reality itself had rejected its existence. The holographic display in the Eryxian Hegemony's war room flickered with a desperate intensity as Exarch Malik watched the Pacific breach widen to a catastrophic diameter. For 3 centuries, the Hegemony had operated under the smug satisfaction that humans were a convenient myth, or mere folklore, the galactic equivalent of checking under a sleeping pod for monsters. Now, that folklore was tearing through the fabric of reality. The precursors, realizing their biological cleaning crew was being turned into training exercises for human cadets, launched what the Council's tactical computers labeled a triple event. 3 Category 4 Kaiju. Emerging simultaneously, their signatures so massive they violated several fundamental laws of physics. "They are targeting the shatter domes," Malik noted, his sensory stalks trembling. These coastal fortresses were what human agricultural consultants had previously described as logistics hubs, but Malik now recognized them for what they truly were: the iron cradles. Within these structures, the humans weren't just storing weapons, they were opening cages for their own homegrown nightmares. On the communication channels, the humans reached Stage 4 of the Annoyance Protocol. There was no screaming, no frantic calls for planetary evacuation. Instead, the humans were drinking literal poison for entertainment, the dark, steaming liquid they called coffee, and discussing accounting. "This isn't a battle, it's a resource management problem," a human logistics coordinator, similar to the one who had once humbled the Kravix Empire, said over the open Council feed. "We've already calculated their fuel consumption and movement patterns. They'll run out of momentum exactly 17 minutes after engagement begins." Malik watched as the Jaeger Gipsy Danger and Striker Eureka were deployed, their textbook execution and tactical prescience, making the Eryxian elite military look like children playing with weapons they barely understand. The humans moved with a coordinated grace, their pilots merging consciousness in the drift to become a pack of predators who'd been hunting together their entire lives. To the Hegemony, it was deeply unsettling to see a species that smiled too much while practicing violence with such surgical precision. They aren't just defending, Malik whispered as he saw human technicians, who were actually high-level combat engineers, installing quantum disruption arrays onto the Jaegers' fists. They are preparing for a demonstration of what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. The triple-event Kaiju reached the Hong Kong coastline, but they didn't find terrified masses. They found a species that had evolved in hell and climbed their way out through rivers of blood. One Kaiju, a winged nightmare, attempted to fly toward the Council's orbital observation station. It never made it. Striker Eureka intercepted it with target practice efficiency, using sympathetic frequency harmonics to detonate the beast's own internal biological weapons. Admiral Webb, Malik broadcasted, his voice cracking with a flavor of existential dread. The precursors are sending a Category 5. The breach is staying open. Your iron cradle cannot hold against a god. The human admiral took a slow sip of his coffee and smiled, showing too many teeth. Exarch, you still don't get it. We didn't build the Shatterdomes to keep the monsters out. We built them to keep ourselves in. Behind the admiral, the Jaeger Gipsy danger didn't just stand. It began to glow with a fusion reaction occurring within organic cells, its steel frame pulsing with unanalyzable energy. We're done being your favorite punching bag. We're closing the door, Webb said. But first we're going to show the precursors why the things on our planet were trying to kill us for millions of years. On the tactical display, the Jaeger didn't move toward the city. It turned and started walking directly into the breach. The holographic projectors in the Council's central observatory hummed with a frantic, low-frequency vibration as a Category 5 energy signature, designated Slattern, erupted from the Pacific breach. It was a biological titan so massive it possessed its own gravitational field. Exarch Malik watched with a numb horror, his sensory stalks limp. This was no longer a cleaning crew. This was a demonstration of what happens when you mistake patience for weakness on a galactic scale. On Earth's surface, the Jaeger fleet had been reduced to a handful of iron gods. But the humans weren't retreating to their primitive bunkers. Instead, the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps had reached a level of focus that the Council's Annoyance Protocol classified as Stage 4. The edge of a cliff marked consequences. Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the command deck of the Shatterdome, not looking at a battle map, but at a probability matrix. Exarch, if you're still watching, take notes. Webb's voice boomed over the secure channel, devoid of its usual diplomatic warmth. We've spent the last few years practicing diplomacy because we understood that the alternative was extinction, either ours or yours. But you let the monsters in. You judged us by how we acted in peacetime. And that was your final mistake. The Council observers watched in disturbed silence as the humans didn't just prepare to defend the coastline. They began accounting for their own destruction. To humans, war had become mathematics, variables, and probabilities. They were calculating the exact yield required to turn the breach into an expanding debris cloud. They are going into the rift, a junior delegate whimpered, his chromatophores cycling through colors of existential dread. They are taking a fusion warhead to a birthday party. Gipsy Danger and Striker Eureka stood at the edge of the abyss, their biomechanical hybrid frames pulsing with unanalyzable energy. The pilots were no longer two individuals. Through the drift, they had become a pack of predators who knew exactly where the others would be. They were the apex predators of a nightmare world, and they were about to teach the lesson the hard way. Sir, the Council sensor operator reported, his voice cracking. The humans have bypassed our sophisticated encryption again. They aren't just transmitting to us, they're broadcasting to the precursor home dimension. They're telling them that Earth remembers everyone who tried to claim us. Malik gripped the edge of his console. He saw the Jaegers ignite their nuclear cores. The humans weren't just fighting a war, they were ending it permanently, either through annihilation or assimilation. The accountants with warships had decided that the cost of the breach staying open was higher than the cost of their own lives. We're entering the breach, Webb announced, his image fading into static. And Exarch, when we get to the other side, we aren't going to be diplomats with table manners anymore. We're going to be the monsters our planet created us to be. As the two Jaegers vanished into the bioluminescent throat of the rift, the Pacific Ocean didn't just boil, it recoiled from the presence of something fundamentally wrong as the human tactical prescience met the precursor's reality head-on. The Council was left in the dark, wondering if the humans were about to flip the table on the entire universe. The sensor arrays on Exarch Malik's observation deck did not merely flicker. They screamed in a digital agony, struggling to process the data streaming from the other side of the Pacific breach. For the first time in galactic history, a primitive species had not only survived a biological purge, but had pursued their would-be exterminators into their own home. Inside the non-Euclidean nightmare of the precursor dimension, the Jaegers, Gipsy Danger, and Striker Eureka were no longer just machines of iron and fusion. They had become the physical manifestations of human justice. Through the drift, the pilots were experiencing a level of tactical prescience that the Colorian Collective's scientists previously deemed a biological impossibility. Their minds were merged, calculating every variable and probability of the precursor's defensive grid. To the precursors, who viewed themselves as the ultimate apex predators, the arrival of the Jaegers was a localized breakdown in fundamental physical laws. The humans weren't fighting with honor or for the sake of a grand story. They were accounting. They were systematically dismantling the infrastructure of the invaders, identifying vulnerable points that were theoretical weaknesses known only to advanced tactical computers. They are not just destroying the hives, Vorn, the science officer, whispered, his chromatophores cycling through a horrified pale white. They are conforming to their nature as survivors of a world that tried to kill them for millions of years. They are treating the precursor homeworld like a Class 12 Deathworld. They are adapting, they are planning, and they are refusing to die. In the heart of the precursor citadel, the overlords, entities that had sanitized 1,000 worlds, found themselves facing a species that practiced violence for far longer than they had practiced diplomacy. The humans had reached stage 4 of their psychological progression. They were actually getting annoyed, and the result was absolute and overwhelming victory. Striker Eureka didn't just fire, it delivered a demonstration of what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. Its nuclear payload primed to glass the planet of the invaders. A transmission, thick with the calculated, cold-blooded policy of Earth's defense, echoed across the precursor's own telepathic network and bled into the Council's frequency. It was Director Webb's voice, sounding like glacier ice tempered in nuclear fire. You assumed we were prey pretending to be predators because we were kind. You assumed our restraint was weakness. But we are the monsters that other monsters made deals with. You came to our home to kill our children, and now you will face human justice. We will not merely kill you, we will ensure you truly understand the magnitude of your crimes. On Malik's view screen, the Gipsy Danger's reactor began to overload. The humans weren't negotiating or bargaining. They were turning everything within a debris field into a monument of their refusal to be victims. As the Jaeger detonated, the explosion wasn't just a chemical reaction, it was a demonstration that reached through the breach, a long memory and even longer reach of a species that had finally run out of patience. Malik watched as the breach began to unmake itself, the precursor dimension collapsing into a frozen tomb of its own hubris. The humans had flipped the table, and the galaxy was finally listening. The Pacific breach did not merely close, it collapsed with a finality that rippled through the fabric of space-time, leaving the Galactic Council's observatory in a stunned silence that felt like it could suffocate a star. On the main holographic display, the energy readings from Earth's Pacific floor flattened into mathematical certainty. The unanalyzable nightmare had been excised from the universe by 2 Jaegers and 4 pilots who had chosen to be the monsters that the galaxy required them to be. Exarch Malik sat in his command throne, his sensory stalks limp and his pride crumbling like a sandcastle in a tsunami. He watched the live feed as the remaining human naval vessels began mop-up operations, not with battle cries, but with the methodical, professional restraint of a species that had just calculated the odds and accepted the inevitable. The Council had spent 73 cycles exploiting humans, treating them as convenient tools and galactic janitors, all while assuming their patience was weakness. Now the myth had become reality, and that reality was infinitely more dangerous than any folklore they had invented to keep their spawn in line. Suddenly, every communication array in the Council's 300 tiers lit up with an incoming transmission. It wasn't an emergency distress signal or a plea for aid. It was a Terran Defense Coalition Priority Alpha broadcast, and the identifier made Malik's blood freeze in his veins. Admiral Marcus Webb appeared on the screen. He wasn't wearing a ceremonial military uniform, nor was he surrounded by the posturing of a victor. He was back in his command chair, sipping coffee with a tired, almost sad expression. The face of a man who had buried 3 billion and had nothing left to lose. Exarch and members of the Council, Webb began, his voice carrying the weight of 3 billion graves. The breach is sealed. The precursors have been unmade. The biological cleaning crew you were so happy to watch sanitize our home has been reduced to expanding debris clouds. We did your logistics for you. We solved your actual problems while you were busy thinking like warriors. Malik tried to form a response, but his vocal chambers felt like they were filled with molten metal. We're done asking nicely. We spent decades being your diplomats first because we understood that cooperation was more profitable than conflict. We smiled because we were happy, not because we didn't have teeth. But you judged us by how we acted in peacetime. And you forgot the cardinal rule of warfare. Webb leaned forward, his eyes hardened into something that reminded Malik of compressed neutronium. From this moment forward, Earth is a sovereign entity. We aren't asking for a permanent seat on the Council anymore. We're redrawing every power structure in known space. We have a list of every political leader who voted for our extermination, and every observer who watched us burn and called it diplomatically prudent. Across 17 Council core worlds, the energy signatures of human tactical prescience were already being felt as hidden Jaegers and automated weapons platforms revealed themselves from behind moons and within asteroid belts. We genuinely prefer peace. But you have forced us to wake creatures we had hoped to never unleash. Our patience has run out. So here is the context for our assistance. We've seen your world now. We've mapped your biology, your tactics, and your weaknesses from the back row. We know where you sleep. Don't make us come back. The transmission ended with a click that sounded like a door closing on 300 years of comfortable assumptions. Malik looked out the observatory window as the human fleet didn't even pursue the fleeing council ships. They just watched, patient and calm, while the greatest military force in 3 galactic quadrants fled from a species that supposedly didn't exist. "What have we done?" a junior delegate whispered. "We started a war with the wrong species," Malik replied. "And now we have to pray they are merciful because we certainly weren't." Outside, the stars continued their dance, indifferent to the fact that the galactic balance of power had just shifted forever. The age of warrior cultures was ending, and the age of accountants with warships had begun. In the aftermath of the breach's collapse, the Council's assembly hall was no longer a place of grand speeches about honor or military tradition. The smug satisfaction that once defined the Eryxian hegemony had evaporated, replaced by the exhausted certainty that they had fundamentally misunderstood the species they tried to sanitize. Exarch Malik watched as the humans, led by the same middle-aged man in a simple gray suit who had once been dismissed as a mere agricultural consultant, took their seats. Not in the front row of power, but in the back row of perspective. From tier 297, the humans could see the real council, not the performance, mapping the social dynamics of a galaxy that was now desperately trying to stay on humanity's good side. The Annoyance Protocol was officially adopted as the new galactic standard for interspecies relations. Every major civilization now understood the stages of human behavior. Stage 1 was the natural state of being friendly and patient, but Stage 4 was the terrifying moment a human said they were getting annoyed. By that point, a human had burned through their entire reserve of patience and was standing at the edge of a cliff marked consequences. The galaxy had learned that the most dangerous species isn't the one that is always angry, but the one that is almost never angry, yet absolutely devastating when they finally get there. "We don't want to rule you," the human representative announced, his voice carrying the weight of a species that climbed to the top of its food chain by being terrifying when it needed to be. He presented spreadsheets and pie charts instead of fusion warheads, proving with mathematical certainty why the Council's previous policies were economically irrational. The humans were predators who chose to become diplomats because they understood that the alternative was extinction caused by their own hands. They had unified and turned their attention to the stars, but they had kept their weapons of mass destruction as a choice, not an obligation. Malik looked at the holographic display, which showed that the training forces the humans used against the Kaiju were only the beginning. The humans had kindly offered a draw in the conflict, but the implication hung in space like a quantum torpedo. The varsity team, the actual human military, hadn't even been called in yet. If a single human ship had been truly hurt, the varsity team would have arrived to ensure the ship became a case study in creative disassembly. The age of warrior cultures was ending. The age of accountants with warships had begun. Every species now listened, thought, calculated, and chose wisely before interacting with Earth. They understood that peace is a choice that only works when everyone chooses it, and that kindness is not the same as weakness. As the humans departed the hall, Malik realized that the real terror was not their warships or weapons, but their absolute certainty that they knew the better way forward, and their perfect willingness to either teach it or enforce it. The myth had become reality, and for the first time in millennia, the galaxy was finally paying attention.